Ready to dive deep into some seriously fascinating stuff about human behavior.
Let's do it.
We're taking on the theories of John B. Watson.
Oh, Watson. Now, there was a real pioneer, a game changer in psychology.
Okay, totally. And we're lucky enough to have some excerpts from Thomley Hakan V to guide us.
A Vietnamese text exploring his theories, right? I've heard great things.
You heard right. And let me tell you, getting into this book
Yeah.
has been mind-blowing.
You know what really gets me about Watson is how he took psychology in a whole new direction.
By saying, hey, let's focus on what we can actually see. Behavior.
Exactly. He shifted the focus away from all those abstract concepts.
What's the soul?
Yeah, all that, and moved it towards something we can actually observe.
Behavior.
Yeah.
It was revolutionary. He really wanted to bring solid science into the picture.
Totally.
Yeah.
And his focus on what he called stimulus response.
Stimulus response.
That was groundbreaking stuff. It's this idea
Yeah.
that every single thing we do,
Yes.
every action, every thought, even every feeling,
Interesting.
it's all a reaction to something happening either around us
Okay.
or even inside us.
So give me an example. How does this stimulus response thing play out in real life?
All right, think about the last time you heard a jingle and it just got stuck in your head.
All the time.
Or maybe you saw a really delicious dessert
Mm-hmm.
and you instantly craved it.
Oh, yeah.
Those are perfect examples of stimulus response.
Huh. So it's like advertising.
Oh, absolutely. Advertisers use this stuff all the time. They know how to push our buttons to influence what we buy. It's amazing how even the smallest things can trigger these huge reactions in us.
Right. So we're not just talking about pulling your hand away from a hot stove, which is kind of an obvious one.
Right, exactly.
This goes way deeper than just reflexes.
Way deeper. And this is where things get really interesting. Imagine trying to understand all these complex reactions we have, but only by looking inward.
Like trying to be your own therapist.
You got it. You see, Watson, he wasn't so keen on this whole introspection thing.
Introspection, so like analyzing your own thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. He thought it was way too subjective, you know?
It's like, how can you be objective about your own feelings?
Exactly. And, think about a time when you totally misread a situation.
Oh, all the time. Happens to the best of us.
Right. But then someone else gives you their perspective, and it's like a light bulb moment.
Totally. Sometimes we're just too close to something to see it clearly.
Exactly. We can be blinded by our own thoughts and feelings.
So if introspection wasn't the answer, how did Watson suggest we go about really understanding human behavior? How do we get to the bottom of it?
He thought we should focus on what we can actually see, the actual behaviors.
Ah,
Actions, reactions, patterns, the observable stuff.
makes sense.
He wanted to bring real, objective observation into psychology.
Like a true scientist.
Absolutely. Measurable, verifiable, the real deal.
So if we're not spending all our time just, looking inward, trying to untangle our own thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
how do we actually start to unravel the mysteries of human behavior? Where do we even begin?
Well, Watson, he was really into the idea that even our most complex behaviors, they all come down to similar, learned responses.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He was fascinated by the work of Ivan Pavlov.
Pavlov. Oh, like Pavlov's dogs.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember learning about them in school. Ring bell, the dog starts drooling. Kind of funny when you think about it.
It is, but it's not really about the drooling itself.
Right.
It's what it represents. It's about the power of association.
Oh, okay, I see that.
Pavlov, he trained those dogs to connect the sound of a bell with getting fed.
Right, right.
So eventually they would start drooling at just the sound, even without the food anywhere in sight.
It's like their brains were tricked into thinking food was coming.
Exactly. He called this stimulus substitution, and it's like a key to understanding how habits and learned behaviors actually work.
So you're saying our brains are constantly making these kinds of connections, linking different cues to certain actions.
All the time. It's happening constantly. Like, think about when you're driving, right, and you see a red light.
Mm-hmm.
You hit the brakes almost without even thinking about it.
Yeah, it's automatic.
Right. You don't consciously think, stop. Red light means stop. That automatic response, you learned that. Over time, your brain linked that red light with braking.
Wow, it's like our brains create these shortcuts,
Yeah.
these little programs for how to behave.
Exactly. And those programs, they add up. They become our habits. And, these habits, these deeply ingrained responses,
Yeah.
they can really have a much bigger influence on us than we might realize.
Okay, so like how? Give me an example.
Okay, there's this really interesting observation in Thomley Hakan V about people on escalators.
Escalators. Okay, what about them?
Have you ever noticed how people walking on the escalator?
You mean instead of just standing there?
Yes, exactly. They often get this, like, the subtle sense of accomplishment when they pass those just standing there,
Oh, yeah, totally. I've totally felt that.
even though everyone's going up at the same speed.
It's so funny.
It's such a funny, small example, but it just goes to show how our urge to compete, that feeling of wanting to be superior,
It's primal.
it can show up in the most ordinary situations, you know?
It makes you wonder, like, how much of what we do is driven by these hidden, like, subconscious motivations. It's kind of wild. But if we can learn habits, does that mean we can unlearn them? Can we change those ingrained responses?
That is the question, isn't it? It's the million-dollar question. And it brings us to another super important part of Watson's research, his work on fear.
Oh, okay. Fear. Everyone's favorite topic.
Right. His most famous, and I have to say controversial, experiment involved conditioning a baby, little Albert, to be afraid of a white rat.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this. Little Albert.
Huh.
It's a bit of a tough one to stomach, honestly. But what exactly did it show about how fear works?
So before the experiment, little Albert, he was totally fine with the rat, no fear at all.
Okay.
But Watson, he paired the sight of the rat with this really loud, startling noise over and over again.
So he's basically conditioning him to associate those two things, the rat and the scary noise.
Exactly. And it worked. Eventually, the poor kid would start crying and crawling away at just the sight of the rat. Didn't even need the noise anymore.
Wow. He learned to be afraid of something he wasn't originally afraid of. That's
Yeah.
heavy stuff.
It is. And it's like our emotions themselves can be programmed,
Yeah.
just like those physical reflexes we talked about.
Oh, right. Like those stimulus response things. It's like we're back to that.
Right. It's all connected. And just like any other learned response, fear, it can be generalized.
Generalize. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so let's say a kid has a bad experience with a dog. Like, let's say they get bitten.
Oh, no. Poor kid.
That fear of dogs, it might spread. They might start being afraid of all furry animals, or even all animals.
Makes sense. It's like their brain is trying to protect them by widening the net of fear.
Exactly. And this kind of generalization of fear, it's often at the root of a lot of phobias.
That makes sense. But, okay, if we can learn to be afraid of something, doesn't that mean we can also learn to get over that fear? Okay, get ready for this because we're about to wade into some seriously deep waters.
Yeah.
Watson, he believed that even language, something we usually think of as totally unique to humans,
Yeah, language.
he thought it all came down to
You're going to love this
behavior.
He saw language as like this system of learned responses built on those same principles we've been talking about.
So it's not that we're just born with this, like, innate understanding of words and grammar.
Right, not some pre-programmed language module in our brains or anything.
It's more like we learn to put sounds together.
Exactly. Think about learning a musical instrument.
Okay. Yeah.
You practice, build those muscle memories, right? For Watson, learning to speak, it was the same kind of deal.
Wow. So every word we pick up, it becomes connected to, like, a certain object and action and idea.
Exactly. Each word gets linked to something.
And then we weave those words together to make those more complex structures, like sentences, stories.
And all those little connections.
It's like those super intricate domino chains.
Oh, I love that analogy.
One domino falls, it sets off the next one, and then boom, this whole cascade of movement.
It's like that with language.
Yeah, one word can set off a whole flood of thoughts and reactions.
Totally. Like that feeling when you hear an old song from your childhood.
The best. Instant time machine.
Right. You're suddenly transported back to that time and place.
Or how about when you can't quite remember a word, but it's right there on the tip of your tongue?
Oh, the worst.
It's like your brain is rummaging through those linguistic domino chains, trying to find that missing piece.
It's a wild feeling, isn't it? And that brings us to one of Watson's most intriguing ideas. He called thinking subvocal speech.
Well, hold on. Subvocal speech. Sounds like something out of Star Trek. What does that even mean?
It's actually pretty straightforward. Watson, he believed that our thoughts, they're basically just internal conversations.
We're always talking to ourselves in our heads.
Exactly. But silently, using those same language patterns we've learned to process information, to figure things out, even to argue both sides of a debate in our own minds.
So all that mental chatter we all have going on, that's us thinking. at least according to Watson. It's not some mysterious process. It's more like a direct result of how we've learned to use language.
You got it. And just like our out loud speech can be super polished.
Like we're giving a presentation or something?
Right, or totally off the cuff.
Like, hey, what's up?
Exactly. Our thinking can take different forms depending on the situation. Sometimes we rely on those well-worn mental scripts, those automatic thought patterns we've built up over time. Other times it's more about problem solving, thinking things through in those unfamiliar situations.
My mind is blown. This is also fascinating. So we've talked about language as behavior, thinking as internal language. But what does it all mean for something as complex as, well, personality?
Oh, Watson had some revolutionary ideas about personality, too.
Really? Do tell.
He wasn't buying into that whole we're born with fixed personalities thing. Nope. Not those predetermined traits we often hear about, like being introverted or extroverted.
Yeah.
He argued that our personalities are shaped by, you guessed it, our experiences, the environments we're in.
So what we think of as our personality, it's just a collection of all those learned behaviors, all the habits, reactions, responses.
It all adds up. It's like we each carry this unique imprint of our experiences, all those interactions that have shaped how we behave, how we react to the world around us. This kind of like this behavioral fingerprint.
I love that. A behavioral fingerprint.
That's what we often call personality.
Wow. We've covered so much ground, from those basic stimulus response mechanics to how we form habits, how language develops, and now even the nature of personality itself. It's pretty amazing how these seemingly totally different things all play a part in shaping who we are and how we navigate the world.
It really speaks to the power of our environment and the experiences we have. Watson's work, it encourages us to look beyond those assumptions about innate traits and consider the huge role of learning and conditioning in our lives.
It's like a whole new lens for understanding ourselves and everyone around us. So as we start to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the mind of John B. Watson, what's one big takeaway you hope our listeners will carry with them?
For me, the most important message is this. Even though our past experiences have a huge influence on who we are, we're not stuck.
We're not doomed to repeat the same patterns forever.
Exactly. By understanding these principles of behavior, we can become more self-aware.
And make positive changes.
Absolutely. We can choose to create the lives we really want.
It's empowering stuff. Well, that's a wrap on this deep dive into the groundbreaking work of John B. Watson. Listeners, take this knowledge and use it. Understanding what makes us tick is the first step to living a truly fulfilling life.